Stay ahead of corrosion with our expert analysis. Don't let corrosion catch you off guard. Our corrosion coupon analysis offers precise data to help you take proactive measures. Don't just send your corrosion coupons to any lab. Send your corrosion coupons to a lab that understands your water treatment needs. B Labs is run by water treaters for water treaters. At B Labs, every corrosion coupon report includes a picture of your corrosion coupon before and after cleaning, because a picture is worth 1,000 words. To find out more, go to scalinguph2o.com/B Labs and up your corrosion coupon game. Once again, that's scalinguph2o.com/BELABS. B Labs, corrosion coupon reports done right. Join the Rising Tide Mastermind. Discover a community where passionate professionals come together to support each other's growth. Be part of a tribe that celebrates your wins and helps you overcome challenges. Don't navigate your journey alone. Find your community with us, the Rising Tide Mastermind. To find out more about the Rising Tide Mastermind, go to scalinguph2o.com/mastermind. Once again, that's scalinguph2o.com/mastermind. Find out if the Rising Tide Mastermind is right for you. Welcome to the Scaling Up H2O podcast, the podcast where we scale up on knowledge so we don't scale up our systems. I'm Trace Blackmore. I get to host this awesome podcast. And happy Valentine's Day, Scaling Up Nation. You know, Valentine's Day is one of those holidays you celebrate a loved one, or you kind of say, hey, this is a made-up holiday. I'm not going to celebrate it. So wherever you land, I wanted you to know the origins of Valentine's Day. So Valentine's Day, also called Saint Valentine's Day, is celebrated every February 14th. And it's originated in the Christian faith, and it was a feast day honoring a martyr named Valentine that later became a saint. Now, where it went from being a day of feast to a day of romantic love is thought to believe that since it was celebrated in mid-February, that is where the spring lovebirds started to come out, and that's where that all came together. I did not know that, but every time I put a show together, I try to teach you something new. And folks, you better believe I am learning right along with you. So Scaling Up Nation, happy Valentine's Day. You know, a couple of other days that you may want to put in your calendar is World Plumbing Day. Yes, mark your calendars for March 11th. And this is a date that's been fixed in the calendars of the world plumbing community since it was established back in 2010. Now it's a fixture on our calendars of political and social institutions all around the globe. The international plumbing community is represented by a council, and this council has a vital role in promoting the link between good quality plumbing, health, environmental sustainability, and increasing economic prosperity. March 11th is marked by celebrations, competitions, seminars, and activities all around the world. People from within the outside of the plumbing industry and fraternity of plumbing come together to learn, share knowledge, build connections, and find opportunities to collaborate to improve the quality of and to access fresh water and safe sanitization. So nation, be sure you mark your calendars for March 11th, World Plumbing Day. Also, on March 11th, if you're going to be in Amsterdam, Aquatech Amsterdam is taking place March 11th through 15th. And this is an exhibition for processed water, drinking water, and wastewater. And they've been going strong since 1964. They have over 200 speakers and 800 exhibitors. So this might be something that you want to check out, and we'll make it easy for you by putting it on our events page. And you, of course, can get there by going to scalinguph2o.com/events. While you're there, you'll also see that March 16th through 19th is the 40th annual Water Reuse Symposium in Tampa, Florida. So, Nation, we've actually had people from the Reuse Symposium on this podcast. That's a great event that you might want to look at attending, and we'll make it easy for you to look into that by going to scalinguph2o.com, going over to our events section, and finally, World Water Day. That's going to be March 22nd. We always try to do a big event with Scaling Up H2O on World Water Day. And the theme of World Water Day is water for peace. So when you cooperate on water, we create a positive ripple effect. So that's the whole message this year. Hey, I think that's the message of this podcast. So we're going to make sure that we celebrate that on March 22nd. And I hope you help us celebrate that as well. You know, the fact that we work in water is such an amazing thing, but we get stuck working in water. And a lot of times we don't celebrate the things that we should take time to celebrate. And I think days like March 22nd are days that we can take out of the calendar just to recognize all the great things that we do and the people we touch because we do them. And I'm going to say, the people that I've been able, I would say touch, but that doesn't sound right. So I'm going to say the people that I've been able to meet in this podcast, by doing this podcast, has just been amazing. So many people I can now call friends because I have this podcast. You all choose to listen to it each and every week. People want to come on this podcast. And Nation, I get to interview these people, and then I get to call many of them my friend. And that is exactly the situation for our next returning guest. Here's that interview. My lab partner is returning guest Adam Tank. Adam, welcome back to the Scaling Up H2O podcast.
Thank you, Trace. It's been a while, but always happy to be here.
You know, we were counting. This is number 4 that you've been on the podcast.
It's almost hard to believe. I mean, our first one was probably 2 years ago, 3 years ago.
So I actually have them listed out from the great staff here at Scaling Up H2O. So episode 181, the one where water geeks talk about social media. Episode 279, the one where what are we talking about hosts come and talk to us. That's where you guys just started your podcast, which we're going to talk about in a second. And then most recently, episode 343, Master Water Marketing with Adam Tank. And that got great reviews.
Had a ton of people reach out to me after that one. And we saw a ton of people posting on LinkedIn, sort of like what we said. If you want to tell water's story, just talk about your day-to-day. Don't overcomplicate it. So we saw really cool pictures of folks that were like, showing their testing kits and some crazy lighting they'd done behind them, and folks out in the field turning wrenches and stuff. And I thought, we did our job. We inspired people to tell water's story. So I was really proud of that one.
Yeah, I got a lot of good feedback from that. And the cool thing that happened was now we start seeing you commenting in the Scaling Up H2O posts. So I enjoy seeing that.
There we go. Happy to lend my little internet fame.
So that was at least a year and a half ago. What have you been up to since then?
Oh my goodness. All sorts of things. My daughter is going to be 2 in 2.5 weeks. So raising a toddler has been quite a journey. The company, we've gone from last year at this time, we probably had 80, 90 people. We're about 130 now, which is pretty incredible growth. We've entered new industries, both in, outside of water, wastewater, doing PFAS treatment design. That's exciting. And then, of course, wrote a book, which we're going to talk about a bit today. So it's been a busy year.
Yeah, you don't let any dust settle. That's for sure.
That's right.
All right, we're going to talk about the book, and we'll talk about this later because I want you to give me a little help because I've always wanted to write a book, and people have been on me to do it for over a decade. I haven't done it. You've done it. You've done a lot with it. You've recorded the audio for it. So make sure we talk about that later. But okay. I want to make sure that we're talking about the book now. What made you decide Adam Tank, need to write a book?
I am obsessed with reading. I have been for as long as I can remember. If anyone was able to see what's behind me right now, I've got 2 bookshelves directly behind me, a third to my right. I've got books scattered all over my desk. So literature has been a super important part of my life. And I've always felt like I wanted to write a book, but never felt compelled on a particular topic or idea where I was like, I really just want to sit down and hammer it out. The exception being this book that's now published, which is sort of a culmination of ideas I've had for the last decade of my life. And I think I got to the point where I needed a bit of a retreat or a relaxation from work. I don't watch sports. I don't watch Netflix. Like I don't really have a hobby per se outside of work and, raising my child. So for me, writing was a way to alleviate stress and sort of get out of my day to day. So I decided, you know what, this is going to be a great way for me to do something that I love doing and then maybe also produce something I'm proud of, sort of check off the task on the bucket list and call it good. So that's where we're at now.
Well, we'll talk about how you make sure you write a little bit every day or however you did that. But I want to get into the book. And you start off in the book by talking about your Rio experience. How did you end up in Rio?
So I used to work in food and beverage manufacturing as a quality engineer. Wasn't directly involved in water per se, but the absence or presence of water in the manufacturing process, in cleaning, in all of that has a massive impact on the safety and quality of the food. So I kind of fell in love with water in my food and bev manufacturing days. And as much as I appreciated the importance of the work I was doing, I realized that big company experience just was not for me. I was stuck inside of a massive organization. I felt like a cog in the wheel. And I really wanted to live internationally, learn a new language, and get closer to a small business, get closer to other aspects of business beyond just quality and quality engineering. So we had a family friend that worked for a small food and beverage manufacturing company in Rio. And they said, hey, we're looking for someone with your exact skill set. Are you interested? So I flew down there, interviewed for a week, fell in love with the beaches, fell in love with the caipirinhas, fell in love with all of that, and decided to make the move. So I literally just a suitcase. I had no responsibilities basically other than keeping myself alive at that time. So I flew down to Rio and the rest is history.
Now, you went on to say that by missing a bus stop, your life was changed. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's right. One of the main principles of the book is that the things that are life changing in many cases are not obvious. So we think about things that are going to be life changing, like, oh, I'm gonna get an education and that's going to be life changer. I'm going to have a kid and that's life changing, or I'm going to meet my future spouse and that's going to be life changing. And while those things may change your life, it's not like the act of getting an education or the act of finding a spouse or the act of having a child. It's these individual moments in time that happen that are life changing. So in the case of education, maybe it's a conversation you had with a friend, you were walking to campus or whatever, and that like set you off on a new trajectory. Or you end up dating someone that becomes your spouse, and over the course of dating them, you realize something about yourself that you never had before. They encourage you to go and take another job, or you move to another city, or whatever that thing is. There are always these moments in time that we can't predict. So in the case of Rio, I was working on a weekend and I didn't realize that the buses had a different schedule on the weekends than they did during the weekdays. And so I missed the normal stop because we drove right past it. And it was like maybe 10 minutes later, there was another stop. And I was like, well, I'll just get off here because it's close enough to my previous stop. And I'll sort of meander my way back to the office. How wrong was I? I ended up in one of the most dangerous parts of Rio de Janeiro, one of the most dangerous favelas. I stuck out like a sore thumb. I was the only white dude, in probably 2 miles. I had on a polo and khakis, and I'm walking through the middle of these streets that are, dust covered, kids kicking soccer balls, people mean mugging me the whole time. And I ended up running into a street vendor named Francisco who just completely opened my eyes to a whole new world of business and entrepreneurship and what it means to have work, but also have your work make an impact. And that was what sort of set me off on my career, not necessarily in water, but just of having a career that is fulfilling and purposeful, where you know that every day you get up doing something that makes a difference in the world. That sort of set me on a new trajectory.
You use the term lightning bolt to describe that. Can you tell us why you use that term?
Because it's almost as rare as a lightning bolt striking someone, these moments, but they're just as impactful. Like if any of us got struck by lightning, it would be a really big deal. If you get hit by one of these moments, and I refer to them too as catalyst moments in the book, when you get hit by a catalyst moment, it is an incredible opportunity for you to change your plight in life, however you best see fit. There's no better moment in time than to take advantage of that energy, if you will. If you think about the metaphor of a lightning bolt, a ton of energy at one time and it's instant. The same exact thing happens with these catalyst moments. So if you can take advantage of that, which I did after the conversation with Francisco, that can be enough energy to sort of get you out of the rut of your day to day and go and do something different, do something either you've always wanted to do, or maybe go do something that, you didn't know you wanted to do, but was a new life path for you that set you off, to go do great things.
I can't remember the book that it was, but I read a book and they had a similar concept. The author said that if you look at anybody's life, there were 7 pivotal moments that really
Mm.
allowed the outcome to where that person is right now. Would you say that's about the same idea of what you're trying to say?
The same concept for sure. I don't know about the number.
Hmm.
So it's interesting they say 7. I don't know if that's like one that happens in childhood, one that happens in adolescence. I'm not sure. In the book, we talk about how these moments actually happen more often than we think. They're happening all the time because change is like the only constant in the universe, but we just aren't taking advantage of them. And so, yeah, I agree. It's these moments and these pivotal moments in time. If you think back, Trace, you or anyone listening to this, if you think back to the key moments in time that defined who you have become and the trajectory that you have gone on, chances are there's a handful of them that you can point to and say, that was the moment. It was a conversation I had, or a person I met, or something that happened while I was traveling, or whatever it is. And it's those moments that are the study of this book because those are super powerful moments.
Well, you talk about the turkey getting ready for Thanksgiving, and the turkey doesn't realize, hey, all these moments are taking place. I didn't realize that I was going to be dinner that Thursday. So is that really what you're saying? That if we don't pay attention, we end up and we don't realize how to value these moments?
That's correct. We become so complacent doing our same routine. Like the turkey, you get up, you get fed, you scratch around in the barnyard, the farmer comes out, scatters some seed, right? You go to sleep. We do the same thing. We get up, we play with our kids, we put on our clothes, we go to work, we take a shower, we drink our coffee, we do whatever. And before we know it, we're 60, 70, 80 years old and we're looking back thinking, what the hell was this all about? And just like the turkey, in this case, the catalyst moment was not a good one because he didn't get fed one day, which was a radical departure from the last, 300, 400 days of his life. And the farmer, instead of bringing out seed, brings out an axe and puts him on the table for Thanksgiving dinner. The same thing happens to us, can happen to us. And it could be either a more positive connotation, right? You may get hit by a proverbial lightning strike and be able to go do something better, escape your sort of turkeydom, if you will. Or you might get something laid off. You might be comfortable with your standard every 2 weeks paycheck and your same routine and your same whatever. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, bam, you get hit by a layoff. And it's like, wow, my whole world is disrupted. These things happen very, very frequently. But what's most important is what you do after that moment happens.
Do you believe in coincidence?
I think people can put themselves into situations that make coincidences more likely, but I don't know that I prescribe to the idea that like everything happens for a reason. I don't buy into that. I don't buy into that mantra. I think everything happens and then you make a reason out of the thing that happened or you prescribe reason to it. That's sort of my philosophy.
In the book, you bring up a lot of celebrities as examples. How did you know all that stuff to even research it? I'm curious.
There are a handful of books that I came across that talked about single moments in time
Hmm.
from all these famous people that had an outsized impact on their lives. And as I started collecting these stories and I was parsing through them, it just naturally some themes started to appear that made sense as to how I wrote the book and how I sort of tied these threads together and how their stories overlapped. And so it sort of came together naturally once I started going down all these rabbit holes.
I really enjoyed it, and I learned a lot. I mean, I didn't know anything about Charlize Theron, and I didn't know Keanu Reeves' story either.
Oh, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. This guy has gone through some of the most horrific life events you could ever imagine, but has still managed to come out on top in many ways, both as an actor, as a husband or former husband, which you could read about in the book, and now, of course, as a rock star. He has a whole career as a famous rock star with his band, and it's incredible that someone like him or anyone for that matter, because we also talk about a lot of folks like you and I, or even my own stories that have gone through some wildly challenging times or some great times, and in either way have chosen to do something good based off of those moments. It's pretty remarkable.
So, as you were researching and writing the book, people in the examples that you used, in most cases, they used the positive outcome of what negatively happened to them.
Correct.
Is there a procedure that we should go through? Wait a second, stop. I don't need to act this way. I need to act that way. Is there a way we can
Right.
coach the Scaling Up Nation and how they should be dealing with situations?
Yeah, I'd say like definitely. The first thing that you need to be aware of is when something happens to you that you're not in control of, that gives you pause or forces you to say, wait a second, this is different. Something here is different than what I've experienced before. And it could be something negative, like in the book, getting diagnosed with cancer would be an example, or it could be something as positive as winning the lottery. These are both outcomes that we can't control, really, or both events that we can't control that both have an outsized impact on our lives. But we can choose to do something in either case with those. So the first thing is you have to recognize these moments when they happen for what they are and understand that they have tremendous power to help you go and achieve some remarkable things in your life. So that's the first thing is just one, something happens, you realize something different is going on, or an event happens and it sort of shakes you for a second. Stop and think and stop and reflect and think, wow, there's incredible power in this moment that I can use to go and do more, be more, see more, achieve more. The second thing you want to do is think about if you want to take advantage of the moment or not. So plenty of these things happen to us all the time that we can't control, but it's up to us to determine if we want to take advantage or not. So a simple example, you might be watching something on TV or maybe on Netflix, you're watching a movie, you're listening to a song, some type of entertainment, and something strikes you and you go, wow, wouldn't it be cool if I were to try doing this thing? Let's say in a movie you watch someone who goes and pursues their dreams by moving to another city. You're like, wow, I've always wanted to do that. But oftentimes we just let that moment pass. And that's okay. You don't have to take advantage of it, but you have to realize that, again, there's tremendous power in that moment. So, second, one, you realize there's power. Second, you can choose or not to do something with that moment. And then the third thing is that if you do choose to do something with it, understand that it can have ramifications not only for your life, but for people that are close to you. So either your immediate family or even generations that extend beyond you. So the end of the book sort of transitions into this idea where there are moments in my life that had an impact on my sister, on my future cousin. I mean, all sorts of wild things that I never would have anticipated. I mean, these are multi-generational outcomes that happened. So just understand that if you choose to take advantage of it, there are second order effects that can happen that are more powerful than any of us can even fathom, that we can even really comprehend over time. Those are the three things.
Listening to that, it reminds me of habit one in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, where he talks about the proactive person focuses on the circle of influence, not necessarily the circle of concern, which is the larger
Mhm.
circle that encompasses the circle of influence. Is that a good reference to what you're saying?
That's one of the books that I don't reference it directly in Luck by Design, but it has impacted my thinking over time. That is one. Another one is beginning with the end in mind.
Hmm.
So thinking about whatever it is, that thing that you want to achieve at the end of the day, if you have a crystal clear goal of that and being able to work backwards to sort of work through the steps that it might take to get you there, that's great because it's great to know like, hey, in the next year, if I can do this gets me one step closer to achieving whatever the ultimate objective is. I think where it differs a bit is that we think we can control those steps a lot more than we can. There's a lot of randomness that happens that can get us there. So if we have that end goal in mind, great. Just understand that the path might look a lot different than the one that you had planned beforehand. I don't know, for folks listening to this, right? Maybe you want to become a class 3 wastewater operator or something, and that is your ultimate goal. And you think, well, if I work so many years and if I study for the exams and if I take these training classes and if I do everything right, then I'll eventually get there. But what happens if someone comes to you with an opportunity and says, hey, if you're willing to move 2 cities away, we'll get you your class 2 faster than you could have in your class 1. That is a moment that you can choose to take advantage of or not. That can get you much closer to that goal, which is not the prescribed path that you sort of thought you were going to go on. But again, it's up to you to take advantage or not. So, yeah.
So the book's called Luck by Design. Can we design our own luck?
Yeah, I think we can by taking advantage of these moments. So I don't subscribe to the idea that some people are just lucky or that some people seemingly just can't fail. Everything they touch turns to gold. These folks are constantly putting themselves in positions where they can take advantage of opportunities that come their way and then they choose to act on them and execute to success.
One of the opportunities that you mentioned multiple times is the fact that you've always been mentored by somebody and you like to give that back as well. Can you speak a little bit to the mentor mentee relationship?
I mean, this is something you certainly understand the power of, and we've spoken about previously, I think on maybe some of the podcasts or maybe independently. Power of mentorship cannot be understated. And oftentimes people feel like it's sort of a one-way street where it's the mentee taking in everything from the mentor and it's growing this mentee into something bigger, better, etc. Oftentimes I find the mentor learns just as much, if not more, about themselves than the mentee does. So, in the book, I reference one of the greatest mentors in my life, one of my biggest personal coaches, and we were on a trip to Iceland, and he sort of made an offhanded comment about this gift that I had purchased in a gift shop there, and he wasn't judgmental. He wasn't trying to coax me in any particular type of way, thinking about the future of this relationship that I was in. But he certainly knew me well enough to know maybe this wasn't the right relationship for me. But he never would have said that outright. He always let me come to my own conclusions. And basically, what he said was, if you're serious about dating this girl, you need to think about getting her something more than a tube of chapstick, which is what I had purchased in this gift shop. And Trace is laughing now. It's pretty ridiculous story. So I purchased this tube of chapstick. My mentor mentions this comment, and I was like, look, like it's fancy chapstick, right? It's like from the Blue Lagoon in Iceland. It's like, what the hell? This is great. But as I sort of sat with that thought and on the flight back home, that little phrase that he spoke sat in my brain, lodged in there, and it became a catalyst for me to really think about, is this the right relationship for me? And I came to the conclusion that it wasn't. And so when I came back home, I broke up with my girlfriend, and it was less than 6 months later that I started dating my now wife. So had that little comment not happened, or had I not chosen to think about it and be reflective about it instead of just saying, oh, whatever, what does he know, right? Like, this chapstick's amazing. Forget this thing that he said. Who knows where I'd be right now? I probably wouldn't have my wife today, my current wife, and I certainly wouldn't have had my child. So there's these ripple effects again that extend beyond just the immediate you, I think, that are incredibly powerful and fun to think about.
So as I was reading that, I was thinking, oh my gosh, he took all of this from the comment about the chapstick. How many comments have people given me that I just didn't even realize that I needed to think about? So I know I've given chapstick out, and probably it's been detrimental in the long run.
It's so funny. It's so funny, but it's something as simple as a tube of chapstick can be, or rather, my mentor's comments about the tube of chapstick can be a tremendously life-changing thing. But we don't think about these things that way. We think the things that are going to change our lives are going to be so obvious, so obvious. Someone is going to thrust a job into your lap, and you're like, yes, here we go, right? My life is forever changed. I doubled my salary, and I'm doing the things I've always wanted to do. Or your future spouse is just going to walk right into your life and just, oh yeah, we're getting married tomorrow, and this is how it's going to be. That's just not how it is. Oftentimes it's through these tiny, seemingly random events that these things occur, and it's really fun to reflect on those.
Well, I have to say, I really enjoyed your writing style.
Thank you.
You have a way of kind of teasing out the story, and then you'll bring in another story, and then you'll finish the previous story. That takes discipline when you're writing. So I really appreciate that. I also appreciate how you refer back to something previous, almost giving
Hmm.
the reader credit for remembering what they read. And you really string out the chapstick analogy because you go into the different systems that we're in and you use chapstick to identify that. Do you mind doing that for the audience now?
Yeah, I'll do as best I can, because it gets a little nerdy, truth be
I
told. And
enjoyed
honestly,
it,
it's
but I'm a nerd.
okay. So that was one of my worries, and it still is one of my worries about the book, is that if you're not someone who's more science minded, I think some of that reading can get a little stale, because right, we go into the chemical compounds that make up chapstick.
Yeah, you were talking about emulsifiers. I was down.
Right. So yeah, I'm sure the water tutors are probably like, yes, this is going to be awesome. But for the general population, they're probably like, not so great, which is fine. They can skip through it. You're not going to miss a whole lot, and you can still read some really entertaining stories about other people. But yeah, this concept, listeners might be familiar with this concept called the butterfly effect. And the butterfly effect is essentially this theory that, like, could a butterfly flapping its wings in some part of the world cause a tsunami in another part of the world? And most scientists, and I think most of us would probably say, no, that's not plausible. But it's interesting to think about how many of these systems are truly interconnected and what it would take for something like that to actually happen in the real world. What we find is that we are all part of much larger systems that some of which we can see and we understand, and a lot of which we have absolutely no idea about. It's never been studied. There's probably something even metaphysical about it that we don't know about. And so I relate this concept of the tube of chapstick to what we call systems theory, in that if you think about a tube of chapstick, it's not just as simple as a tube with some goo in the middle that you apply to your lips and all is well. You have the packaging, you have the chemical compounds of the chapstick itself, you have a little screw inside the chapstick that will turn the chapstick to a certain degree. You have the way that it's packaged, make sure that it stays solidified to some extent. Of course, unless you mess up and you have it in your car and it melts and right, it causes a big mess, whatever. There's so many variables that go into making a really good tube of chapstick. And the point is that if any single one of these variables change, the chapstick changes completely. And in the book, it talks about when chapstick was originally created, it was created by someone who created the substance itself, but didn't know how to package it appropriately. So people didn't know what to do with it. It was literally like, just think about like a glue stick, without any sort of packaging around it. And so finally, this guy ended up buying this invention from someone else. And his wife was like, hey, this feels more like a makeup product. This feels something like we should package as more like lipstick in a sense. So she put this beautiful wrapper on it, added the twisting mechanism, and voila, here we are. Chapstick is a monster industry today. It was a simple change, a simple idea from her that they took advantage of that sort of launched this entire industry, which is now known as chapstick. But the point is that the same systems that apply to chapstick also apply to our lives. And if any one of these variables change, which they do all the time, it can either ruin you if you let it, or you can take advantage and, again, go on and do great things.
Well, I have to ask, what did you end up doing with the Iceland chapstick?
I honestly don't know. I have no idea. Maybe I chucked it in a trash can. Yeah, not sure.
I love that metaphor that everything's interconnected, and especially everybody that listens to this podcast, we deal with water. I mean, how can you not see all the interconnections?
Totally. Totally. One of the most connected substances on the planet. And not just the ecosystem of the water cycle, but water is connected to our economies. It's connected to our geopolitics. It's connected to the health and well-being of each of us as humans. I mean, it is the fundamental molecule. So yeah, you're absolutely right, Trace.
How did you get from food and beverage to water?
I ended up interning with GE Water in graduate school. Happenstance, there was a case competition, which is common in business school, and GE was the one that was sponsoring it. And the case competition happened to be about something in the power industry. And one of the judges was in GE Water. And winning the case competition afforded me an opportunity to interview with GE for a summer internship in between the first and second year of my MBA. And we ended up winning this case competition. I interviewed with GE Water and I got the job, and here we are.
We don't know if it's 7 moments, but that was one of them.
Exactly.
Now, we've spoken about Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich before, just organically on this podcast, but you call it out in this book. I want to ask, one, why is that book so important to you? And I will let you know that that is my favorite story in the book that you share with your friend. I know it's going to allow people to see how amazing this book is. Do you mind sharing that story?
I would be happy to. So I grew up in a family who did not come from business. My dad was in federal government. My mom was largely stay at home, but also was a part-time teacher. And neither of those career paths ever appealed to me. I always felt different. I didn't want to join the military. I didn't want to go down a teaching route. I thought I wanted to be a doctor, but I wasn't quite sure. But I always thought and felt differently about things, much different than my immediate family did. And reading Think and Grow Rich in college was the first time where I realized, like, wow, I'm not alone in the way that I'm thinking about the world. There are people out there that think the way that I do, that see things in a similar light. And it basically was a catalyst for me to feel more self-confident in my own beliefs and the things that I wanted to pursue, and basically feel like I could do this on my own without the approval of anyone else. So huge, 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 huge game changer for me. I think I read it when I was like 19, 20. So we fast forward a handful of years, and I meet this young man at Kansas State University, which is where I went to undergraduate. And he was a Black guy who grew up in Los Angeles in foster care. which Trace, you and I are both very passionate about. Grew up in foster care in LA, was introduced to gang life very early on, had a number of harrowing experiences, which are just a shame for anyone to have to go through, someone especially that's as young as 10 in this case. And he ended up in and out of juvenile detention centers, etc. Well, his uncle ended up sending him back to Kansas when he was, in his late teens, early 20s, and sending him to college and being like, you have to get out of this environment or you're going to end up dead, either in prison or dead. So I met him at Kansas State. He was in student government with me, and I gave him the book Think and Grow Rich because him and I always had some really deep conversations. Like, I'm this white kid from Kansas. He's this black guy from LA. Like, what do we have in common? But we always found common ground. And we really, I think, opened each other's minds about things. So I gave him this book and was like, hey, this was a huge deal for me, and maybe it will be for you as well. When we graduated, I lost touch with him for, I don't know, 5-6 years, maybe even longer than that. And when I went to look up to see where he was, I found out that he was in prison. And I was shocked because he graduated with a degree from the same university I did. He seemed to be on a really good path. I couldn't believe that this guy had ended up in prison for, whatever the charges were. And the only thing I could think about doing was sending him a card and just letting him know that I was thinking about him. And on that card, I wrote, Think and Grow Rich. I knew he would remember it because we talked at length about this book in college. Think and Grow Rich. I still believe in you. That was it. And I shot off this postcard and I didn't know what happened to it. I never heard anything back. Fast forward a couple years after that, I get a message on LinkedIn out of nowhere, and it's from him. And he's like, Adam, I just got out. Like literally the day before, whatever. I just got out and I want to call you and talk to you. So I got his number, I got on the phone. And what he told me was that postcard was the thing that changed his trajectory in prison, that made him realize that he wanted to do better for society and for himself when he got out. Something as simple as not even two sentences, a sentence, a couple of words on a postcard was a catalyst for him to go and do something better with his life. And it's the power of, again, the power of a book to me. That book then had ripple effects for him, for all the people. He started a nonprofit that helped folks that are returning from prison back into society to land on their feet and, start businesses and get good jobs. So who knows how much of a further ripple effect that has. But it's just, again, the power of something so small, a book in this case, right? Or a postcard, tiny little things, monster impact.
Like I said, that was my favorite story in the entire book. It really allowed me to look inwardly and think, how many times was I going to write a postcard, or how many times was I going to send a text message or reach out and do a phone call, but think, oh no, they're busy, or maybe I'm busy and I didn't do that. And how many opportunities do we miss by doing that? So I love that story. I think it teaches
Thank
us
you.
that we need to really grab onto the moment, and we never know what kind of inspiration we can be for somebody.
You're exactly right. That's exactly right. What's even crazier now is that it's so much easier to do how hard is it to fire off a text to someone?
Yeah.
How hard is it to record a voice note? How hard is it to send a quick email? Just say, hey, I'm thinking about you. Hope all is well. In no world is that going to be contrived as something negative, or like, oh, I'm too busy to read this, or this is a bother. Like, that's just not going to happen. But for some reason, we still choose not to. I don't know why that is, but I mean, you just now in this conversation, there's a couple people I need to send notes to after
Right.
this. So,
Right. That's been a challenge that we've given the audience every so often, is let people that have really helped you in your career, in your life, that, hey, you've been part of this. And I'll get emails back from people saying I either sent the card or I received a card. So I love messages like that, because we don't cherish the relationships that we have, and we don't celebrate them outwardly enough.
it's a shame.
My grandfather I had until he was 98. And he didn't have a talk with me saying, son, this is the secret to life. But I do remember a conversation where he said, nothing else matters but the relationships in your life.
Yeah, I've heard it. Nothing matters but the people that you meet and the books you read, which, of course, I'm a sucker for books. So I really love the second part. But the first one is absolutely true. I mean, your life effectively is the sum of the quality of the relationships that you have. It is.
It truly is. We talked about Think and Grow Rich on an earlier podcast, but that was the first time that I know of that the term mastermind was actually written. Maybe Ben Franklin, he had a group called Huntus. I don't know if he called it a mastermind though, but there's so many reasons why that's such a good book.
Oh, yeah, you bet. And now you've got your own mastermind, which is phenomenal. I still haven't got a chance to check it out yet, but one of these
Yeah,
days
we'll have to talk
I will be
about that.
there.
We'll have to talk
Yep.
about that. Up to quite a few groups, and one of the things we try to do there is cherish the relationship. So by having great examples like the story that you just shared, it just shows how important that is. Adam, what is one of the things that you learned from not only the process, but the whole experience of writing this book?
Oh, there's so many things. The first one, and we need to talk about your aspirations of writing a book. And I think this might be a good opportunity to do it. If you want to go down this journey, you better know why you want to do it. And your why shouldn't be the fact that you want to make a bunch of money being an author.
Well, I'm assuming you're retired and right now you're on your yacht that you're
Oh
recording
yeah.
this.
Oh yeah. I'm here on my beach, whatever, in Mexico, retired, sipping tequila sunrises. No, I'm very much still in my house in Kansas, living a very modest lifestyle. The goal of writing this book was not to become rich. The goal of writing this book was not to become known as a famous author. The goal was none of those things. The goal simply was there was an itch I had to scratch, and it was an itch that hadn't gone away in literally a decade plus of wanting to write the book and ideally wanting to inspire people. That's ultimately the goal. So, if you're going to do this, one of the biggest things I learned was you have to have a very compelling why, or else you're going to give up. Because there can be a lot of drudgery, a lot of monotony. When you go and you try to sell your book and you realize no one's buying it, and you're like, what did I just do all this for? What's the point of it? It has to be driven internally. So I'd say the biggest learning for me was if you're going to go down this journey, just make sure that it's really clear why you want to do this thing. So in your case, Trace, you've said like you've wanted to do it for a while. A lot of other people have encouraged you to do it too, but you just haven't gotten around to it. There's probably a reason for that. You may not have a strong enough why yet. I mean, obviously you're busy working on other things. You got all sorts of other things to do, but you could have just as easily spent your time writing a book as you did standing up masterminds or recording podcasts or doing all these things. For some reason, you've chosen to do these other things and not write the book. And so if you choose to go down that path, my advice would be just ensure that you are dead set on why you want to do this in the first place.
That's great advice. And I would say that that's probably why I haven't spent more time on it. I don't know why, but when I get in front of a keyboard, when I'm writing content for the show, that just flows. When I was trying to write the first couple chapters of my book, it just seems like my mind kept on wandering. So I don't know if that tells you something that I should be doing differently, but that's been my experience. In fact, I so much more enjoy speaking through the microphone than I do at the keyboard. So anyway, I guess I can do a speech to text or something and maybe write the book that way.
Yeah, you could do that too. You definitely could. Or there's technology is now so capable of being able to help with these types of things. If it's easier for you to speak into a microphone, right? You and I could set up 10 recorded sessions where I ask you questions about the topic that you want to write about. And before you know it, we've got whatever, 20, 30,
Hmm.
40 hours worth of content that you can then feed into solutions that will summarize it, that you can use to write it in different styles and all these things that will serve as inspiration for you to sort of get flowing without getting in your head and getting stuck in just these circles that we tend to do.
All right, well,
So
we'll have to talk about that. I've got a coach. He's been telling me for over a decade that there's at least one book in everybody,
you bet.
and you have to write yours. And I started this podcast because it was easier than writing that book.
There you go. And for some people, they think podcasting is a lot harder, right? So if this is a natural avenue for you, that's great. And it's good to know that. So yeah, use it to your advantage.
Something else you did is something that I enjoy. You read your book, and I love it when the author reads their book. So I want to know what that experience was like. If I ever do get the book finished, that would be something that I would want to do, record for Audible so people can listen to it. One, how do you even go about doing that? And what's it like being in the studio? And I don't think you messed up one word. It was like everything was perfect. How do you do that?
Great editors. I thought, I wouldn't say long and hard about this, but I thought hard about this. Do I want to have someone else read the book who's a true professional at reading books or voice acting or whatever, or do I want to do it myself? And I just couldn't fathom someone else reading this story. I felt like it had to be me. So I decided I was going to do it. So then you look at how you want to accomplish this. one of the ways to do it would be just like you and I here are now. We have our headphones, we have our microphones, we set up some sort of little box that keeps our, voices isolated, and we just record it. But I knew that would probably screw up and the quality would be terrible. And second, I probably just wouldn't get it done. Like it would just take me too long. There's so many variables at home I can't control. My daughter might yell, the dog might bark, right? Whatever. Of course, I'd have to edit it, and there's all these standards that Audible and all these other places you have to follow as for terms of noise levels and all this stuff. So it's quite technical. So I decided to hire a professional who had a studio here in Kansas City that I could go to and record at. And I think it took us, I want to say 4 sessions, and maybe 4 sessions of like 2 to 3 hours a piece, which were exhausting, absolutely exhausting. It is exhausting reading for that long, screwing up, having to re-record the same line 2-3 times. The book has, in some cases, foreign languages. So like there's parts that are in French that I had to read in French. There are parts in Portuguese I read in Portuguese. There are some very challenging names of scientists and researchers that I talk about that I didn't know how to pronounce. So all of these things, right, you don't think about, but when you start to read, you realize this is really challenging. So it's grueling, for sure. It's grueling. But I will say, now I have this beautifully recorded audiobook that I can sell forever. And I've realized, I think, if I look at my total sales, I probably have sold nearing 10,000 copies now of the book, which is pretty cool. I'd say about a quarter of those are now audiobook sales. So it's just another great avenue. Some people prefer to listen to audio and listen at 2 or 2.5x and, knock it out that way as opposed to reading it.
A lot of people will tell me they listen to this podcast at 2.5x, and their number one comment is like, oh, you really speak slowly in real life.
It is strange when you listen to someone on that speed and then meet them and you're like, wait a second, something's different here. Something's not right.
Yeah, I had somebody challenge me. It was about a year ago, if not a little bit longer, that I wasn't listening to content fast enough because you can absorb it a lot faster than you think, but you just gradually have to go up to it. And I remember the first time I sat in somebody's car where they were listening to something 2.5 times speed. And I was like, whoa, how are you ever getting this? But if you go to 1 to 1.1 to 1.2 to 1.3, you don't even notice that. And I've been able to read a lot faster. I say read, I'm really listening to, but I'm able to understand the content. I'm able to go through a lot more of the content. Yours, however, I listened to at 1.0.
Really?
I did.
Wow.
Because I know you, and you were actually there reading it to me. I could see you reading it to me. So I didn't want to mess that up.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Absolutely. Is there a book number 2?
Oh my goodness. I don't, not in the near term. No. I have some ideas about stuff I'd like to write, but it truly is a big commitment. And now that my daughter is much older, the company's much bigger. It's just the demands on my time are so much greater. And I'm finding other avenues to sort of like scratch my creative itch and sort of get out of the day-to-day and relieve stress. So not in the near term. No, probably not even the next few years at a minimum.
Well, the last question I want to ask you is, you mentioned so many leaders in the book, and almost all of them have some sort of strife that they've had to go through. Are you saying that without the strife, that leadership doesn't exist?
No, I don't think so. I do think that strife creates more resiliency in people, and resiliency is definitely a trait of some of the best leaders that I know of. But, I think for me, it's that these moments, these catalyst moments, whether there's strife, whether they're extremely negative things, or whether there's something that can be perceived as more positive. So like a simple example, I talk about Jane Goodall on the book, who is our chimpanzee loving friend who studied monkeys and basically was like, wow, they're a hell of a lot smarter than we ever gave them credit for. She knew that she always wanted to travel, and she wanted to go live in Africa for some reason. She ended up getting a letter from a friend that she had met early on in her childhood who had moved to Africa for some reason or another. And her friend was like, hey, here's a free ticket for you to come to Africa if you want. Like, just throwing it out there. And of course, she instantly latched onto it and took advantage. And I didn't find any stories of strife in her life. I found primarily like these positive things that happened to her that she then took advantage of to go and become. And I would say that she's arguably a phenomenal leader in her field. Now, whether or not she's a people manager or those things, I don't know. I don't know enough about her story, but she's a phenomenal leader in the world of biology, most certainly. And it's all because she chose to take advantage of these moments. And I have a feeling someone like her just as easily would have taken advantage of something negative that would have happened. Stephen Hawking is another great example in the book. Both positive and negative things happened to him. Obviously, his disease and his disability was certainly a big deal for him. But in the book, you come to find out that had very little impact actually on his life. And the thing that had a lot more impact, I'm not going to give it away, was something that was much more positive in nature.
Yeah, I was fascinated by that story. That
Yeah.
was
Yep.
not what I would have guessed without
No,
reading the
me
book.
neither. Me neither. You think someone that, you get diagnosed with something like that, you're thinking, oh, my life's over. In reality, he basically was like, whatever. Something I have to deal with, but no big deal, you know? And the thing that ended up sort of propelling him on this trajectory, becoming one of the world's leading scientists, was something very different. So,
Well, we started out mentioning the podcast that you do. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
yeah, what are we talking about? We interview the water industry's best storytellers and learn tactical examples about how to tell a water story, either for yourself or for your company or your product or your solution. I've always felt that as a water industry, the bar is really, really low, almost non-existent for telling better stories, because by and large, we don't do a good job of it. So this is Jim, Laurie, and I's attempt at helping people tell better stories.
And I want to put a push again for episode 343. You do a great job of saying how easy it is to tell that story, because you're right. We don't tell good stories when it comes to what it is that we do. You laid out very simply. And as we saw right after that show aired, people were starting to do that. So we'll make sure to have a link to the book, a link to the podcast, and we'll also put a link to that episode that I just mentioned. I can't thank you enough for coming back on the show. And I want to personally thank you for writing a book I thoroughly enjoyed reading.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, Trace.
Nation, someday I need to do a bonus material content release because, as I'm sure you know, we do a warm up where we're talking with each other before we start recording, before I hit the record button. And then after I stop recording, we do a wrap up where we're just talking about various things. And Adam and I probably spoke 3 times as long after the podcast than when we did during the podcast. Just such an amazing guy. He mentioned we have several things in common. We're both in the foster care system. And I never would have met him had it not been for this podcast. And because of this podcast, not only have we met, we have become good friends. He's actually helping me write that book that I keep on threatening how to write. And who knows, there might be something else in our future. But all around, really, water and trying something new. And I love the point in his book where we were talking about if he didn't write that note, would that have given the gentleman that he shared the story with the motivation to turn around whatever he needed to turn around? And he took the time to write it. And then it was up to that person to do with whatever they would with it. But he took the time to write it. And that just made me think, how many times am I not taking the time? And it wouldn't be that much time, but it could mean so much to somebody else. And maybe that's trying something new. I remember when I was thinking about doing this podcast and I didn't know anything about it. It scared me. If you listen to episode 1, you hear how horrible that was. But that was time number 1. And then this is time 400 and something. You get better at stuff, but it allows opportunities. I am so glad my friend Charlie Cicchetti planted the seed that I needed to start a podcast. I'm so glad that I had the courage to not get scared, that I didn't know anything about podcasting, and I was going to put something out there and hopefully somebody would listen to it, hence episode 1. But I did it, and now it's something that I enjoy, and now it's something that I've just met so many people because of this podcast. And as you just heard, Adam is one of those people. Now, I did meet James McDonald from the podcast. I met James McDonald because I went to one of those conferences that I'm telling you that you should go to at the beginning of each and every show. And it was because of the Association of Water Technologies, actually more importantly, because of my volunteer leadership involvement with the Association of Water Technologies and James stepping up to do volunteer leadership We met as committee chairs in different parts of the AWT, and we were collaborating between our committees and just instantly hit it off, had an admiration for each other. And who knew that so many years back then that I was going to have a podcast and James was going to be a permanent fixture on that podcast? What do you know?
Hello and welcome to What Do You Know? The game show where we find out what do you know about industrial water treatment, drop by drop. So pump up your brain, take out that test kit of knowledge, and prepare to answer this week's question on What Do You Know? Today's question is, what is the proper regeneration sequence of operation for a co-current regenerated sodium zeolite softener system? Backwash, then brine injection, then displacement, also known as slow rinse, and lastly, fast rinse. I'm James McDonald, and thanks for playing along with us. Stay tuned for next week's episode of What Do You Know?
Well, thank you, James. And Nation, if you need to get caught up on What Do You Know, we make that very easy. Of course, we've got that in every one of our show notes page. So just go to scalinguph2o.com. Look at our recent episodes and you can follow right along with James. Of course, the easiest way to do that is to just listen to all of the episodes that we have starting from January. That's where James started his new What Do You Know series, and you can keep up along with everybody. I love that James helps us try to get a little bit better each and every week, and that's what I hope you do this week. Maybe it's that letter that you write to somebody. Maybe it's not even a letter. Maybe it's a postcard that you just write 2 lines, like what Adam said, and send it off to somebody. Maybe the next time you think of somebody, instead of just thinking about them, you go ahead and send them a text, or maybe you make a phone call to them. When we stay connected, there is just something magic that happens around everything else. Just like when you listen to this podcast. Thanks for listening, and I'll be with you next week. Struggling to prepare for the Certified Water Technologist exam? Our Certified Water Technologist prep course is here to help. Gain the confidence you need with comprehensive study materials and a 100-question practice exam. And the best part, we offer a free version to get you started. Head over to scalinguph2o.com/CWT prep and take the first step towards your certification today.